the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, according to his tradition, is that he is the first sign of the end. That he actually, his coming was the first sign of the end of time. That's how the Muslims view that. Now, according to the Muslims, all religious traditions have told about the end of time. There is a hadith in which the Prophet said, no prophet has come except that he told his people that time would come to an end and there would be certain signs. So we have in the Christian tradition about the end of time. One of them, you will hear there will be famines and earthquakes in many places, and you will hear of wars and rumors of wars, which is very interesting also, especially with modern CNN and all this stuff, right? Which is a type of just talking about wars and also potential things. And then you have the book of Revelations, which deals also with the phenomenon of the end of time. And many Christians, if you go into Christian bookstores, just so many books on the end of time, right? Really a lot of books. And as we approach the millennium, I think we're going to have more and more of this, because you're starting actually to see, I mean, you know when the publishers get greedy, when they start publishing these kind of, because some of these books are way out there. Right? I mean, you read, and this poor guy who wrote, he's the most famous, Hal Lindsey. He's the most famous. This guy, he has to revive his books every 10 years because he identifies, like, 1 year Kissinger's the Antichrist, but, you know, Kissinger's not around anymore, so he has to revive it every so often, because they literally trying to take the Bible and apply it to immediate events. And there's actually a television program in some states where there's a guy, he's like a newscaster with his wife, and unbelievable, like every event. Oh, well, there's Daniel 3:14. You see, Daniel says that this will happen, this will happen, and there you have it. Look, isn't that wonderful? You know, Iraqis are being bombed just like the Bible said. It's so wonderful. Jesus is, it's all, you know, and it's really interesting to watch these characters, you know. But they're out there, and people tune in and get very interested. And then National Enquirer's also got their little, you know, you get these, the Globe, right? The end of the time coming. So you have a lot of, it's almost become comical, you know, the guy with the thing, the end is nigh. But there really is a lot of craziness. And traditionally, the Muslims have really kind of seen every single book I've ever seen, whether it's from the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th century, they say, well, all the signs are there, the end is nigh. The idea being, in reality, the end of time is the end of our lives. I mean, that is the ultimate end of time, that we will die. And so that is an end of time. But there is also an end of human time. And so within the tradition, I think the most definitive hadith about it, which I think is also the most wonderful, is that the Prophet Muhammad said, if the end of time comes upon you and you're planting a tree, then finish planting it. In other words, don't become millenarians. Don't become people that run off and just, the end is, no, do what you're doing. Keep working. Keep doing it. If it happens, and you happen to be there when it happens, but don't let that stop you from action. So there is an idea of, yes, there is an end of time. There are signs. Now, in the tradition here, the first thing he asks him about the end of time, he says, tell me about the sa'ah, the hour. And he says, the one being questioned doesn't know any more than the one questioning. In other words, I don't know. And he says, well, then tell me about its signs. And then the Prophet says, peace be upon him, the slave girl will give birth to her mistress. Now, that's an interesting statement. The slave girl will give birth to her mistress. And the scholars traditionally dealt with that in a lot of different ways. One of them is they said at the end of time, slaves who in the Islamic, like for instance, the Mamalik became rulers. And many of the scholars said this is it. The Mamalik were slaves in Egypt, and they actually became rulers. They said, here they are. They've become the masters. Another interpretation was that children would treat their parents like, this is a traditional interpretation, that children would treat their parents like servants. They would order them around. They would tell them what to do. That there would be a loss of respect in that relationship. But I think probably the deepest interpretation is that there would be a radical disequilibrium in social structures. When you look at the relationship between a servant and a mistress, the relationship is like a mother and a daughter. The mother is to be obeyed, nurturing the daughter obeys the mother. When that is turned upside down, then you have a radical disruption in the social order. If you look in the Quranic narrative, the first and foremost expression of a Tawhidic worldview, of a belief in one God, is ihsan to the parents, beauty to the parents, showing beauty to the parents. The Quran says, and God has told the human being to honor his parents. The mother first, it says, Ummuhu hamalathu wahnan ala wahn. The mother nurtured and gave birth to the child, sapped and weakened. Right? So the 9 months of nurturing a child in the womb, giving birth, suckling the child, raising the child, changing the child, doing all of these things, that there is a great debt owed the child to the parent, particularly the mother. And this is why the Prophet said that the paradise is at the feet of the mothers. It's literally at the feet of the mothers. And the Prophet was once asked, who is the most worthy of my companionship? And the Prophet answered, your mother. And then he said, and then who? He said, your mother. And he said, and then who? He said, your mother. And he said, and then who? He said, your father. And then in another tradition, a man came to him and he said, Ya Rasulullah, O Messenger of God, I am cleaning my mother in her decrepit age the way she used to clean me. Is that filial piety? And he said, no, that's payback. He literally said that's recompense, right? You're just, recompensing what she did for you. So the disruption of the parental-child relationship is a deep disruption within a social order. And we can see that really, I think, not simply in our own societies, but it's becoming quite a global phenomenon. The idea of rebellion. There's an idea in our culture, certainly, that it's a given that children will rebel. Right? This does not happen. Suleiman Yang, who's from the Wolof culture, right? I mean, in the Wolof, is there any idea of that? Of a adolescent rebellion against the parents? I'm just curious. There might be. Do you have any idea in your culture of like adolescent rebellion against the parents?
Well, I mean, the way they are socialized, they have the age grade set. So it's beginning to happen because of westernization, but it wasn't there.
It was not there. That would be consistent with my experience in Mauritania, that they really had no concept of children rebelling against the parents. Whereas it is becoming a norm, and with westernization it's increasing because of the idea of rebel without a cause. That there is this idea that children have to rebel, that they have to establish their identities. There's an awful lot of identity foreclosure in the Ericksonian type of model, I think, in the Muslim world. There's an idea that you really have to do what your parents say. And I think there's a lot of abuse that happens from the parents to the children, because they do have an upper hand there. So you do see that. A child will become an engineer because that's what the parents say that they should be, right? Which in our culture, I think that's, in a sense, one of the positive aspects of our culture, is that there is a type of freedom that is allowed for a young person in many, many families. I mean, it's certainly not true across the board, but there are many families that do allow a child to experiment and try to find out. And I think that's actually a very positive aspect of our society and civilization. But the idea of the breakdown of the social structure is something that is definitely part of the end of time, that we move into a disequilibrium. If you look, there's a wonderful book on this topic written by a French scholar and intellectual called René Guénon, which is called The Reign of Quantity. And in that book, he talks about the idea of moving away from a quality-based culture into a quantity-based culture. And he considers that what the Hindus call the Kali Yuga period, the last period of man on earth, that it would be a period of great disruption and turmoil, that there would be a massive upheaval of traditional models and a radical new type of way of looking at the world, which is related more to quantity than quality.